Bethan Hughes, a young woman full of life, vanished on her way home from work in the seaside town of Penmorfa. Dylan Morris, the trusted lifeguard who once symbolized safety, was revealed to be hiding the darkest of secrets. Their names, once ordinary, became forever tied to the night terror struck a quiet Welsh coast. What began with an abandoned car on the cliffs spiraled into a web of symbols, secrets, and betrayal that shook an entire community to its core. This is the story of how a peaceful town discovered that even the most familiar faces can hide unimaginable. Darkness, the town of Penmorfa, resting quietly on the Welsh coast, was a place where the air always seemed heavy with salt and calmness. Rows of stone cottages lined the narrow streets, their chimneys releasing thin threads of smoke on cool mornings. The sea was never far from sight or sound. Its steady rhythm shaped the lives of those who lived there. Fishermen rose before dawn, pushing their small boats into the water, while shopkeepers unlocked their doors at the same time every day. Evenings were slow and predictable, with families strolling along the promenade, children chasing gulls, and the elderly sitting on benches, watching the tide. Penmorfa had the kind of stillness that people from larger towns envied. To outsiders, it seemed untouched by the chaos of modern life. That was why, on the first day of October, the town's peace felt brutally interrupted. Just beyond the cliff edge, on a lane where the road met the open sea, a car stood abandoned. The vehicle was a dull blue hatchback, parked awkwardly with its driver's door wide open. The wind pushed against it, causing the hinges to creak in a haunting rhythm. On the passenger seat lay a mobile phone, its screen cracked as if it had been dropped in a hurry. Beside it sat a keyring holding several house keys, one of them bent slightly out of shape. Most chilling of all was the faint smear of blood across the steering wheel, no larger than the width of a hand. A local dog walker was the first to stumble upon the scene. At first, he assumed the driver had gone to admire the view of the sea, or take a walk down the path. But the longer he looked, the more the details unsettled him. The air inside the car smelled faintly metallic, a sharpness that didn't belong to the salt breeze. When the police arrived, they marked off the area, their presence drawing curious onlookers from the nearby cottages. It had been years since anything more serious than petty vandalism required their attention. Rumors began to spread before the officers had even left the scene. Some said it was a failed robbery, others insisted someone must have slipped off the cliffs and been taken by the sea. Yet the absence of footprints around the car made the latter less convincing. The coastal path was muddy after recent rain, and anyone who had wandered too close to the edge would have left clear marks. The silence of the area was another strange detail. Birds circled above, but the usual sounds of tourists or walkers were absent, as if the location had been carefully chosen to remain unseen. By that evening, Penmorfa was buzzing with speculation. The pub was louder than usual, conversations interrupted by anxious glances. Parents reminded their children not to linger outside after dark. Even the fishermen, who usually shrugged off town gossip, spoke quietly about the discovery while repairing their nets. The image of the car with its open door seemed to hang over everyone, a shadow against the ordinary rhythm of life. The police worked methodically, towing the car away and searching the cliffs, but there was no sign of the driver. No one came forward to claim the phone, and no one in town admitted to owning the vehicle. As the autumn sun set behind the horizon, the lights of Penmorfa flickered on one by one, yet the atmosphere had changed. Where once the town had felt sheltered, it now carried the uneasy sense that something dangerous had crossed its borders. The sea still moved in steady waves, but to those who looked out at it that night, it felt less like a comfort and more like a warning. At first, the abandoned car was treated as little more than an accident. The assumption was simple. A driver panicked, perhaps slipped over the cliffs, and the sea had swallowed the evidence. But as the days passed, that theory grew weaker. No body appeared along the shoreline. The car was traced to a rental company in Cardiff, booked under a false name with no traceable address. Whoever left it on the cliff road had taken careful steps to remain hidden. 1 week later, the sea delivered a cruel discovery. A fisherman hauling his nets at dawn noticed a bulky object bobbing against the tide. It was a suitcase, its exterior, battered and softened by salt water. He dragged it onto the pier, expecting ruined clothing or discarded rubbish. Instead, when police unzipped it, they found neatly folded women's clothes inside. Dresses, blouses, a pair of shoes, all carefully placed as if packed for a trip. There was no wallet, no passport, no identifying marks. The only unusual detail was drawn inside the lining, a rough spiral in red marker crossed with a sharp X. It looked clumsy, almost childish, But its presence gave the find an unsettling edge. Word spread through Penmorfa within hours. Some claimed the suitcase was unrelated, a coincidence washed ashore by chance. Others whispered darker theories, tying it to the blood found in the abandoned car. When police announced that a missing woman had been reported in the nearby county, those whispers grew louder. Her name was Bethan Hughes, a 24-year-old who had not returned home after a late shift at a seaside cafe. The clothing inside the suitcase matched the description her friends gave to investigators. What began as a puzzling car left on a cliff now felt like the early pieces of something much larger and far more sinister. Search parties combed the coastline, dogs sniffed through dunes, and helicopters circled the cliffs, but no further trace of Bethan appeared. Residents watched from their windows as uniformed officers walked door to door asking questions. Many in the town had known Bethan, or at least seen her at the cafe. She had been friendly, cheerful, and ordinary. That fact disturbed people most of all. If someone like her could vanish so completely, no one in Penmorfa felt entirely safe anymore. Evenings, once spent in laughter along the promenade, became subdued. Families avoided the pier after dark. Shops closed earlier. The chatter in the pub shifted from jokes to speculation, each theory more frightening than the last. Some believed Bethan had run away, escaping to another life, but the blood in the car told a harsher story. Others began to speak of strangers they had noticed in town in recent weeks, faces they did not recognize, lingering by the pier or sitting in parked cars. Small details that once would have been ignored now became warnings. Investigators focused heavily on the symbol in the suitcase. It was unlike anything they had seen in local cases, and its crude design gave it an eerie weight. Was it a signature? A message? A taunt? The idea that the suitcase had been placed deliberately in the water unsettled them further. If it had fallen in by chance, the clothes would have been scattered. Instead, everything was tightly packed, as if the bag had been meant to survive the waves long enough to be found. The unease in Penmorfa grew sharper as newspapers from outside the region began to report the story. Journalists visited, asking questions and filming the quiet streets, which now looked less like a peaceful seaside retreat and more like the backdrop to a haunting mystery. For the first time in years, police patrols became a regular sight along the promenade. Officers carried torches into the night, their beams of light cutting across alleyways and gardens. The people of Penmorfa began locking their doors earlier, peering through curtains at the sound of passing cars, convinced that whoever had left the car and the suitcase might still be walking among them. The sea, once a symbol of freedom and calm, now seemed menacing. Each wave crashing against the rocks felt like an echo of the unanswered questions hanging over the town. Where was Bethan Hughes? Who had marked the suitcase with the spiral and X? And, most pressing of all, would the tide reveal more than anyone in Penmorfa was prepared to face? The days following the discovery of the suitcase turned into weeks, and the search for Bethan Hughes became the central focus of Penmorfa. Posters with her photograph appeared on lampposts, shop windows, and the entrance to the pier. Her face, smiling and full of life, was a constant reminder of the fear that now gripped the town. Police urged people to come forward with any information, but leads were scarce and inconsistent. Some swore they had seen Bethan walking near the cliffs that night, while others claimed she had been spotted near the bus stop heading out of town. None of the accounts matched up, leaving investigators with a trail that seemed to twist and fade away. Then came the footage. A camera mounted outside a small shop captured Bethan's final recorded moments. She was walking down the high street just after closing time, her bag slung over her shoulder, her pace steady. What chilled investigators was not Bethan herself, but the figure walking beside her. A person in a dark hooded coat appeared at her side, matching her stride. The hood was drawn low, shielding the face from view. More disturbing was Bethan's body language. She was not trying to escape, nor did she seem distressed. She walked, as though she knew the figure, even trusted them. The recording ended as the two disappeared beyond the reach of the camera, swallowed by darkness. When news of the footage spread, the town's unease deepened. Everyone began to question who the figure could be. In a small community like Penmorfa, it was difficult to imagine such a secret existing in plain sight. Yet, as police traced Bethan's last hours, a troubling picture began to emerge. Several residents recalled seeing unfamiliar individuals in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, men and women who did not fit the rhythm of the town. They sat for hours at the pier without fishing, loitered near the bus station, or walked aimlessly through side streets. At first, they were dismissed as passing tourists, but in hindsight, the memories felt sinister. Theories began to spread faster than facts. Some believed Penmorfa had been chosen by outsiders deliberately, that the isolation of a coastal town made it an easy hunting ground. Others whispered about a hidden group operating in secrecy, people bound together by rituals and symbols like the ones scrawled inside the suitcase. Every unfamiliar sound, every shadow at night, became fuel for speculation. Families avoided leaving home after sunset. Groups of teenagers who once lingered on the beach were now kept indoors by anxious parents. The life of Penmorfa had shifted from quiet trust to suspicion. Police pressure grew as the investigation stalled. Officers conducted house-to-house interviews, asking residents if they had noticed anyone suspicious. The responses were vague and conflicting. Some pointed to newcomers renting holiday cottages, while others looked uneasily at neighbors they had known all their lives. The longer Bethan remained missing, the more paranoia spread. It was no longer just about finding her, it was about uncovering the truth of whether Penmorfa itself had been infiltrated by something dark. Behind closed doors, investigators pored over every detail. The spiral X symbol was sent to experts, compared against records of known criminal groups and cults. Though no exact match was found, the possibility of ritualistic meaning could not be dismissed. A troubling idea began to form. The disappearance of Bethan might not be an isolated incident, but part of something far wider. Coastal towns often carried a sense of transience, with strangers passing through unnoticed. What if Penmorfa had been chosen because it was small, quiet, and unsuspecting? The weight of unanswered questions pressed on the community. Church services were filled with silent prayers for Bethan's return. The promenade, once filled with laughter and music, now seemed like a corridor of unease. The sea still rolled against the shore, yet its presence felt heavier, as though it too was hiding secrets beneath the surface. Penmorfa's calm had fractured, and even those who refused to believe in rumors could not ignore the truth. Someone had walked among them, leading Bethan Hughes into the shadows, and that someone might not be a stranger at all. 2 months after Bethan's disappearance, when the town had begun to live in a rhythm of dread, the sea offered no answers, but the land did. A group of hikers crossing the dunes stumbled upon something grim. Beneath a shallow layer of sand, disturbed by wind and shifting tides, was a mound that seemed unnatural. When the police unearthed it, the truth came into view. It was the body of a young woman wrapped in a torn blanket, her features distorted by time and exposure. She was not Bethan Hughes. She was a stranger, unknown to the people of Penmorfa, and her presence there posed a chilling question. How many more had been taken before anyone noticed? The scene sent waves of panic through the town. The body bore no obvious identification, but a bracelet remained on her wrist. On its surface was the same spiral X symbol that had been found inside the suitcase weeks earlier. This discovery turned fear into full-blown terror. It was no longer possible to believe that Bethan's disappearance had been a one-off tragedy. Something systematic, deliberate, and sinister was unfolding in their midst. News of the body spread quickly, carried by whispers in the pub and murmurs in the grocery shop. Some residents refused to leave their homes at all, while others kept watch outside with torches, as if light could ward off whatever darkness lingered. Parents clutched their children tighter, and the sound of a knock on the door after nightfall became enough to send hearts racing. Penmorfa, once known for its safety, had become a place where every glance was suspicious and every shadow was a threat. Investigators broadened their search. Records from across coastal towns in Wales were examined, and chilling similarities began to emerge. Over the past 5 years, several missing persons cases had been filed in scattered seaside communities. Tourists who vanished, drifters never seen again, even locals whose disappearances were chalked up to suicide or accidents near the cliffs. Few had been properly connected before, but the Spiral X changed everything. It was now clear that Penmorfa was only the latest link in a chain of horrors stretching across the coast. The police presence swelled, officers arriving from outside to strengthen the investigation. Yet their arrival only heightened the sense of unease. Armed patrols along the promenade reminded residents of the danger, even as they offered reassurance. Helicopters cut across the night sky with searchlights, sweeping over fields and water. But the figure from the CCTV, the hooded person walking beside Bethan, remained unidentified. As fear grew, so did speculation about motives. Some thought it was the work of a cult, obsessed with the sea and strange symbols. Others whispered about traffickers using small towns as staging grounds. Theories swirled in every home, each one more unsettling than the last. What united them was the belief that the killer or killers were not strangers passing through. They were close, near enough to watch, near enough to strike again. The psychological toll on Penmorpha was heavy. Businesses struggled as tourists avoided the town, unwilling to spend holidays in a place spoken of in headlines for death. Fishermen sailed out, but looked nervously toward the shore, unsettled by the thought of what the sands might hide. Teenagers, who once treated the beach as a playground, now avoided it entirely, terrified of what they might stumble across. The sea, the dunes, the cliffs, landscapes once seen as beautiful, had transformed into backdrops for nightmares. With the body discovered, investigators faced both clarity and chaos. Clarity because the Spiral X confirmed a connection between the suitcase and the remains. Chaos because it suggested something far larger and more organized than anyone had feared. The murder in Penmorpha was not isolated. It was part of a pattern. And though the body found was not Bethan, her absence loomed larger than ever. If she had met the same fate, she had not yet been returned to the land or the tide. As the winter wind swept over the town, the atmosphere thickened with dread. The people of Penmorpha no longer asked whether terror had reached them. They asked how long it had been there, unnoticed, lurking quietly while they went about their peaceful lives. The spiral and X had become symbols of a nightmare they could not escape. Proof that what they feared was real and closer than they dared to imagine. The discovery of the second body changed the investigation completely, and with it, the mood of the town. For the first time, detectives began working under the assumption that the killer was not passing through, but someone rooted in Penmorpha itself. The idea seemed unthinkable, yet every scrap of evidence pointed in that direction. Locals had seen nothing, and yet Bethan had vanished without a trace. A stranger could not have moved so freely without attracting suspicion. The figure in the CCTV footage had walked beside her with confidence, leading her into the night without hesitation. That detail suggested trust, and trust could only belong to someone she knew. Officers re-examined Bethan's circle of friends and acquaintances. They scoured her messages, her work history, and her movements in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Slowly, a single name began to emerge, someone who seemed beyond suspicion at first. Dylan Morris, a respected local lifeguard, had been one of the first volunteers to help in the search. He was known to nearly everyone in town, admired for saving. Swimmers caught in riptides, trusted with children's safety along the beach. He had been at the very heart of Penmorpha's community, a figure of reassurance in a time of panic. Yet as investigators dug deeper, his alibi to the night Bethan vanished crumbled under scrutiny. Bank records showed that Dylan had rented the car later found at the cliffs, using a false identity. Surveillance footage placed him near the cafe where Bethan worked in the days before she went missing. Most disturbing of all, a search of his small lifeguard station revealed scraps of paper hidden beneath the floorboards. Each scrap carried the same Spiral X symbol. Some were drawn in black ink, others in red. They varied in size, as though practiced repeatedly. Alongside them were maps of coastal towns across Wales, circles marked in red along the shoreline. The suitcase, the bracelet, the grave in the dunes, they were all threads in a web that led directly to him. When police prepared to arrest Dylan, he was already gone. His station stood deserted, his lifeboat missing from the harbor. It was as though he had anticipated their move and slipped into the water before anyone could stop him. The news broke across the town like a wave of betrayal. Parents who once pointed to Dylan as a hero now spoke his name with fear. Children who had waved at him from the sand stared at his empty tower in silence. The man who had been trusted to guard the sea had instead used it as a shield for his darkest secrets. The search for Dylan spread beyond Penmorpha, but he left little trace. A few days after his disappearance, a fisherman reported a sighting of a lone boat drifting in the fog. But by the time the Coast Guard arrived, the sea was empty. Some believed he had drowned, swallowed by the same waters that had hidden his crimes. Others insisted he had escaped inland, perhaps joining others who shared his twisted obsession. The evidence from the map suggested he had not acted alone. Bethan Hughes was never found. Her name joined the growing list of women whose disappearances could be traced back to the same pattern. The body in the dunes remained unidentified, and the Spiral X symbol continued to taunt investigators as a signature without explanation. For the people of Penmorpha, closure never came. They carried on with daily life, but the atmosphere had changed forever. The pier felt quieter, the cafes emptier, the promenade watched with cautious eyes. The waves of Penmorpha still crash against the shore as they always have. steady and timeless. Yet to those who live there, the sea no longer feels like a friend. It is a mirror of the mystery that engulfed their town, beautiful on the surface, hiding darkness beneath. Dylan Morris remains a ghost story whispered on stormy nights, a reminder that even the most trusted face can mask unthinkable secrets. Terror had struck their quiet seaside town, and though the tide carried away the evidence, the memory lingered like a scar that would never fade.